Hopefully
Cool.
that works.
I think it's going. Perfect. Thanks so much for meeting with me this morning. How did you meet Josh?
We used to work together.
Nice.
Yeah. Um, I was working for Canonical on some projects related to Ubuntu
Uh-huh.
and living in Florida. Distributed team all over the world. And I was like, I need to hire some more people in Florida. So Josh is one of the people I found.
Nice. I met Josh in Portland. He and I did some music projects together.
Nice.
And also has helped me like foray into the tech world.
Very cool.
Yeah, it has been cool. I was watching some of your videos and also your recommended stuff, and I really enjoyed it, especially with how much information you have available.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Uh, what, like, how did you get into this field?
Um, it's a great question. Like, with that, where I'm operating Kindly Ops, or like personally, or
I guess information security to start off with.
yeah. So my background personally is as a software developer.
Hmm.
I tried to do everything else, and that was what I was good at. So I tried to get out of tech pretty much my whole life.
Yeah.
Um, I was CTO of a healthcare startup, so I was trying to work at smaller and smaller and smaller companies. So I was CTO of a small 10-person healthcare startup, and we had a cash flow problem hit us in the face one day. And one of the things that I was able to do to help the situation was to take my salary off the table. So we thought we were going to have to close the doors. We managed to keep the company open. It was software that I absolutely loved. The founder is a genius. She is a psychiatrist and builds amazing software to help people with recovery from mental health issues. And so we laid off half the company, including me, and the company is still running today. So I actually still do occasional work with them, but I had no cash and no laptop and needed work. I had also recently moved to a small town in Maine, and felt like we hadn't finished unpacking yet. So it's like, okay, this is not on my timeline, but looks like I need to start a company.
Yeah.
It was really my wife's idea. I didn't have that confidence to do it. And so, so you need, you have some limitations, right? When you have no capital. So
Right.
it's got to be a services firm. And then it's like, okay, what skills do I have and what problems can I solve? And I realized that my thinking was that I wanted something that was kind of like an office cleaning business, meaning that I wasn't competing with inside resources, where it was actually the companies that were hiring us would be happier that we were an outside third party rather than employees. And so a lot of software development projects or other projects, people may begrudgingly use an outside firm, but feel that that's a failure. And very quickly are like, well, let's have our own team in-house do this. And I understand those dynamics.
Yeah.
But like, if you're running a law firm, you're super happy that you've got a third party company cleaning your offices, and they can show you how they do it, and they can show you their training manuals, and they can show you everything. And you're like, that's cool. I don't want to manage those people. We don't want to bring that in-house, right? Unless
Nice.
you're very, very large. And so DevOps, and then more specifically, information security, seemed like work that would never be done, right? And where it would be beneficial, like having an outside perspective would actually bring a tremendous amount of value rather than being a weakness we had to try and compensate for and compete on price or something. And then as we've aggressively built expertise in information security and DevOps, we've started to realize like the really interesting stuff is happening a little higher up the stack. So after starting Kindly Ops, I discovered, hey, this entire category exists called governance, risk, and compliance. And that's where the real interesting things are.
What is that?
So information security is a lot of tactics, right? It's like, what locks are you using? what encryption are you using? Are you using these very specific controls, multi-factor authentication or a VPN? Very, very specific tactics. That is one component of operational risk. And so why do you care about those things? Well, you care about those controls because bad things could happen. And those bad things that happen could cost you money. And money is a very crude proxy, but it's a very useful proxy, right? Mm-hmm. So lots of stuff happens in between, but at the end of the day, a bad thing could happen and it could cost you money. And so then you care about those controls. There's other operational things that could happen as well, right? A driver of a company delivery van could get in a car crash. You could be robbed. A physical store location could be robbed. There's all kinds of other things that could happen. Equipment could break down. One of your vendors could fail to deliver and cause ripple effects. All of that stuff is operational risk. That's one category of several other types of risk. There's market risk and credit risk. And so all of that stuff boils up into risk. And then it's oh, well, there's this thing called risk that businesses are grappling with. And famously, there's this saying that all profit derives from risk. And so the enterprise of business itself is about trying to understand and manage risk. And to manage risk really means to make better decisions. And then it starts to get super interesting because it's how do I help people make better decisions without micromanaging? Maybe I haven't met those people. Maybe I'm going to try and do it for a company that doesn't exist yet. How do I get people I haven't met in a company that doesn't exist yet to make better decisions that work out better for everybody?
Yeah,
that's governance.
Sounds similar to things that I try to do as well.
Yeah, so that stuff becomes governance. And so
governance.
So then governance is okay, we passed a law that you have the California Privacy Act. That's governance. And then the circle completes because how do you actually stay in compliance with those governance rules that are imposed from above? Well, that's the compliance part. So governance, risk, and compliance is kind of this triad. And there's these big time lags between the different pieces, and you have to flip between different levels, down at the nitty-gritty controls, and then zoom up to thinking about governance and influencing society, and then flipping over to compliance. And because of that time lag with law and technology, there's this big fuzzy area that often is the source of frustration for technologists, where they recognize that the rules imposed from above, the details of those rules, may not be the most effective way to actually achieve security, right, and reduce risk, right? The thing they're actually trying to do is reduce risk. And so it's well-intentioned governance, but maybe the battlefield has changed. And so you need some different things. So a great example is the requirements for password complexity, right? Really bad for user experience. In retrospect, sort of a big wrong turn in the road. But there was years and years where in order to be in compliance, you had to have these password complexity rules enforced on your users, really messing things up. And so risk analysis then is where all the action really happens, because then you can actually look at the risks that you are facing and the controls that are available, and you can offer up an analysis and say, based on the analysis that I did, here's why we think we're meeting the objectives of these compliance rules in a better way, in a more effective way. Because it's always a trade-off, right? It's never about preventing all bad things from happening.
Right. It's how you react when it does happen.
Yeah. And as a society, we're okay with a certain number of people dying.
Right. I saw that in one of your talks where you're this is the acceptable amount of risk for I think it was medical errors you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Or just food safety, right?
Yeah.
Some people die every year from problems that happen because they went to a restaurant and ate some food. And we're okay with that.
Because we created the system and reduced to a certain point.
To a certain point, right? And if we reduce it to the point where okay, we don't have restaurants anymore, we're no, that's not reasonable. Maybe those people would die at home. Maybe more people would die at home. We feel it's at the right balance. There's risk in the world. Bad things happen.
The question I have about risk is, do you think the layperson on the internet understands the amount of risk they're getting involved in?
No, absolutely not.
And I think that's my problem, because I talk to my friends who are software engineers and just like people who use the internet every day. And myself included, the reason I wanted to talk to you is because I don't fully understand where my vulnerabilities are. I know that I have to do things like two-factor authentication and passwords, but I don't know who I'm protecting from or what I'm protecting myself from.
Yeah, and I think that's where like technologists can really get it wrong, because there's this very natural obsession and like focus on prevention. And like I'm not worried about prevention one bit. Like in the big picture, right? Like sure, there's like hygiene, like wash your hands and like lock your computer. And there's a list at any given time. There's a list of some prescriptive rules that you should follow. Maybe you get them from your employer, most likely. Maybe your friend told you to like set a password on something, but like somewhere there was like a prescriptive list of rules to follow.
Right.
But you're not like out there trying to analyze and prevent everything. But some of the technical folks are really, really focused and doing valuable work on prevention, but it loses sight of the big picture. And the big picture is there's 1,000 different ways that things can go wrong. And like, I think what we actually should be helping each individual person achieve is resilience, not the idea of like walking around afraid that something bad could happen, right? But just like assume that the bad thing does happen. How are you going to get past it? And so like maybe how you're going to get past it is the same way you get past like breaking your leg when you fall down the steps, right? You're going to have friends. And so like figuring out how to foster local community, really, really, really powerful. Like maybe a friend checks on you and I'm thinking about older people. Maybe a friend checks on you and sees that, you know, you've got failing eyesight and you didn't realize there was this really dangerous situation developing with your refrigerator or something else. And so a friend visiting you notices that and like helps you take action to correct it. But you didn't have to walk around like fretting about things all the time and checking things all the time, right? You're just like part of a community. Right. I think it's like that on the internet too. It's like, well, what's the worst that could really happen, right? Like you could lose your computer. All your money could be stolen out of your bank account. You could be embarrassed if some private information, like, so assume all of those things happen. Like, how are you going to get past it? And maybe there's a thing you can't get past, and maybe you want to like analyze those a little bit deeper, but figuring out like the recovery, the resilience part of it, I think is like where the benefit really happens. I've been thinking so much about like, how do we defend older people from credit card fraud? Because there's like all these multiple parties involved, and we've been in our business like actively trying to fight some fraud recently, the last couple of weeks. And criminals are breaking into legitimate business email accounts from small, older business owners, like they've actually like semi-retired, and then using those to sign up for services. And when we're validating the business, like we're like, yeah, this is a real business. But then they're using stolen credit cards. And it's like part of this like multi point scam, and everybody involved like has like a fallback, a recovery thing, like a chargeback or insurance or like a certain percentage allocated for fraud, except like the person who was the like unknowing victim at the beginning, and like nobody's looking out for them. And so like that's where like I really, really worry about like just helping each other out, like on individual human level, not at a technical level.
Got it. So I think I understand more, because I'm a worrier. I'm like, is everything secure? Am I protecting myself? And the thing I should be asking is like, okay, if someone got all my stuff, what would I do to rectify that situation?
So here's how I think about it. Like, we should worry about internet security the exact same amount we worry about our house burning down.
Okay.
Right?
Hmm.
Um, Absolutely, you might go visit a friend who parties too much and has candles everywhere, and like, dude, you need to get your life together. This is dangerous. I'm not coming over here. Like, I'm not letting my kids spend the night here.
Hmm.
This is bad. I have a friend who lost somebody in a warehouse fire last year. Like there was a big rave that went wrong. Um, it happens, right? But you don't spend every waking day worrying about it. There's some like really basic best practices, like let's have fire. Well, so businesses have to have fire extinguishers, but individual homes, it's like, yeah, it's a good idea to put some smoke detectors in, and the insurance companies apply some pressure there. But you have insurance, and you have a smoke detector, and you have at the governance level a safety net built in with municipal fire departments. And like those aren't a thing that existed a couple hundred years ago, right? Um, there was this emergent risk that started affecting everybody. And instead of the private citizen being responsible for maintaining a fire department, that was like a service that was provided.
Mm.
And I feel like there's a time lag again where the amount of trouble that we face from the internet is so pervasive. The real fix is not for everybody to become firefighters. It's that we should provide services to protect people and help them like recover when things do go wrong.
Um, what about for individuals, like to use your analogy, like high risk individuals like journalists, for example, are very concerned with like privacy or
Mhm.
security. Um, are there next level practices other than just like for your rave example, if someone's has a environment where fires are more likely to happen,
Sure.
are there things that they can do or resources or services that are a step above the layperson?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's just like a firefighter, right? Where
Hmm.
like, yeah, they're going into a high risk environment, they're suited up. They're carrying oxygen. They've got all of these things. They're working in a team. They have trained beforehand. They've rehearsed. They've actually like set up buildings and cars on fire and practiced before like facing the real thing. And so I think all of those same techniques apply. Um, there is a really, really fascinating book about, so it's called Sources of Power. And it's about how you train and develop skills for people who are going to be making life and death decisions that affect other people. So, like the idea of training a firefighter, like how do you get someone? We think about like a fire chief as being fully formed or a surgeon as being fully formed, but you're actually taking a person who has no idea what they're doing and has made plenty of stupid decisions and like transforming them into a person who can operate with the level of skill that you're comfortable with them killing someone. They are at some point very soon in their career going to have to choose who dies. And how do you get that person to that? How do you get that person to practice those decisions?
Right.
Right. And that's actually a thing we've been doing for a very long time in other fields. And so I just feel like with information security, we have to look to these other fields, these other high risk fields, and use those techniques, those basic techniques. Um, and you can do it. You absolutely can develop those people.
That's that's good to know. And I'm curious about like if you are in a high risk environment, do you just reach out to someone like you then? Are you the firefighter that I contact or a service like you if I needed that kind of security or protection?
Yeah, I think you have to ask yourself, like, what is the mission that I'm undertaking and what are the resources that I have,
Hmm.
right? And like, who's going to be on my team? And this is where I think it gets scary for an independent person who's not working with a company to really understand the risk that they're taking on. Like, what are you actually trying to accomplish? Um, if you are going into a hostile environment, like maybe the right thing to do is not to harden things like your phone and your laptop, but to not bring them, right? Like think really low tech. Like what are you?
Yeah.
And but then if you are working with an organization, right, like maybe you're working with the military, or maybe you're working with a large newspaper, they're certainly going to have a team who's going to help you make those trade-offs. And you have to be, I think you have to, as an individual, no matter what precautions you're taking, what support you have on figuring out those precautions, you have to play worst case scenario in your own head and understand, what does recovery look like? Is recovery possible from this?
What do we know about like criminals or like attackers? Like, is there a general demographic, or are they from all over the world at any given time?
You're talking about like
Who's breaching security?
Like breaking into computers and stealing credit card numbers and things
Yeah.
like that. So I think there's a big difference between when an individual is targeted versus general crime.
Mm-hmm.
And so, or crimes of opportunity. The crimes of opportunity stuff, I think, looks very much like a creative agency or a development agency that we have doing legitimate work, where I think there's people in cubes going and looking for sites to break into. And it's another day at work.
And is that happening in the States? I know that, or abroad, or is it everywhere?
It's happening all over. But like when I put bring servers online, people are knocking on the front door trying to break in within minutes. Like that's just normal. Like you just see like, oh, someone showed up, like seeing if the doors are locked.
This is surprising to me. Like, of course, I know that there are businesses that make a business of breaking in and manipulating, like Twitter, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Why do these companies exist and aren't being cracked down in the physical world?
I don't know. Like crime exists all over the place. Physical crime exists too, right? So like the reason people do crimes is because they make money. And then there's like a huge spectrum of like the degree to which the crimes affect society at large. And I think a lot of computer crime stuff that is happening right now is many small things. And so it can be very, very difficult to correlate them and to figure out how to effectively shut them down. It might cost a lot more to actually prevent the thing from happening than it does to just like write off the loss, if you know what I mean.
I think my question is, I don't engage in internet crime for fear of getting caught and lack of understanding.
Oh, sure.
And do criminals have the same fear, or do they have this safety net that they will not get caught continuing to do what they're doing?
I can't imagine, like, I'm not a forensic psychologist, but I can't imagine that any criminals feel that being caught is a foregone conclusion. They might feel like there's some risk, but they probably feel like there's a pretty good chance of getting away with it.
This is surprising to me. That people can sit down on their computers, where I generally believe that I'm being surveilled at any given time.
Sure.
And I'm surprised that power that like my government or whoever's watching my internet traffic isn't using that to stop internet crime.
Right, but you're being surveilled, like shoplifters are being surveilled too, and like that still happens.
Fair. Okay.
Right? Like they're not necessarily making the best decisions of their life, and maybe they're not getting caught the first time. Maybe they are eventually getting caught. I don't know what percentage are just doing it a couple of years and then getting bored or moving on with their life or growing up. But yeah, like crime is like this really big thing that just exists in society. It's not a problem specific to the internet.
Right. I think the thing that I'm thinking about, like specifically, do you listen to Reply All at all?
No, that sounds cool.
Yeah, Reply All is a podcast that just has stories from the internet.
Mm.
And oftentimes they'll discuss like internet crime that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say maybe like 50% of the time they report on something, it's teenagers that are doing that, bored teenagers
Mm.
that are managing to, like, for example, hack into Jack Dorsey's phone, the CEO of Twitter,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Well, so that's it. I think that that is a slightly different category
Mm-hmm.
where that's a specific target,
Right.
right? That's somebody that's high profile. There's a specific target, and maybe the motive is vandalism or thrill seeking or whatever. But then you
Mm-hmm.
have a team of people working to, with a very specific target, not just like looking to steal money.
Right.
And I think that's much harder to defend against. Eventually, you slip up, right? Eventually, like you have.
Right, because hundreds of people are trying to get into like Zuckerberg's account every day.
Yeah, and even like a high-ranking official in the military, you talk about other kinds of threats, like tries to be safe and has many millions of dollars deployed on trying to keep them secure, and still gets killed, right? So like, I guess don't be famous.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Um, yeah, I think I'm curious about the people, because what we're discussing on the protection end is you're going to get hacked, and it really doesn't matter who it's going to come from. And
Right,
I'm
right. So
worried. I'm wondering if there's ways to like bring the noise to the criminal instead of for them it's just another day, and they have the ability to ruin someone else's day.
sure. So um, when I'm working with clients, what we talk about is like, okay, so you have laptops, you have these other resources. So we're working through after you did get breached,
Mm-hmm.
what happens. And with medium-sized businesses, we're looking to shift the heavy lifting of defense onto a place that has more resources. Like, how can we effectively deploy dollars to get better defenses? And so, for example, if we're working with healthcare clinical data, what happens if that gets stolen off of a doctor's laptop? There's very heavy fines, and not to mention all of the people that are affected, right? Like, um, they're unhappy about that. So we're not going to make the doctor's life really difficult by trying to make that laptop impossible to break into. We're going to figure out how to get that data somewhere else. So like, what is the doctor doing with that? Well, he's running some mathematical simulations and analysis for his research, or for her research, that runs against these patient records, all these test results. So let's run that in the cloud instead of on your laptop. And then you're signing in there, but now you're in a situation where there are literally over 1,000 full-time security engineers defending the perimeter. Like, there's no amount of money you're going to spend that's going to have that stuff better defended on your laptop. So don't have it on your laptop. And those are the trade-offs we make. When you talk about like hacking back and things like that those are pseudo military techniques that should not be employed by people who are not part of a pseudo military team.
Right.
It absolutely exists.
Okay.
That's absolutely exists. We went. So I went to a DEF CON, a local DEF CON meetup here in Maine yesterday, and the presenter there is a pen tester. That's what he does for work, and he's also in the Coast Guard Reserve and leads the web strike team for the Coast Guard. And was talking about last summer. There's actually like some info here on this presentation that they did called Hack the Ship. So this was, I guess, last year in September. They're going to do it again this year in September. But they realized that all of the commercial shipping vessels were like at Windows XP level of not very well defended, not very secure, incredibly easy to break into. And the protocols that are used for anti-collision, the AIS systems, can be easily spoofed. So you can broadcast a ghost ship location, and the steering system trying to avoid collision will like steer into a real thing because it's confused. And so the military, you can be sure that the US Navy is deploying those types of techniques against their enemies. But people in the private sector just like are largely not thinking about those things and are not defending against those things. And so the Coast Guard is actually thinking about right now mandating through governance the same authority they used to say you have to have lifeboats and you have to have life jackets. They're going to try and use that same grant of authority to require that ships get pen tested, private sector cargo ships. They're not looking for those ships to start carrying a cybersecurity militia and attack back against attackers. Like, like that's escalating things to a level where, like, I just don't think
it's too much effort.
Private citizens are like allowed to engage in that level of combat.
That I think that's totally fair and valid. So what I understand is that there are like government forces that enforce on like this kind of thing.
Yeah, we were talking about fire department earlier, right? So fire department is mostly reactive. They do some education work. The other big things that we have are police and military. And so does cybersecurity look more like a police thing or a military thing or a fire department thing? Like, I think it's all of those, and we're still trying to figure it out. But I 100% believe that asking the average private citizen or activist to like level up to the level of a soldier is like the wrong way to go.
Fair. I agree. Why did you want to get out of tech initially?
I don't know. I like the real world. These days, I've revised my thinking some, and now I'm sort of obsessed with bending technology to support humans. And so I'm good at tech, so I feel some responsibility to use those skills to try and make a tiny dent in the amount of suffering that exists in the world. And so through all of the jobs I've had, I've been trying very, very hard to bend technology to support humans rather than asking humans to get in line and work the way that the technology expects them to work.
Do you have any favorite stories from your career?
Oh, about doing those bends. There's one that I feel proud of. So this was at the healthcare startup. There was a requirement coming in for being able to do audits. So you have medium-sized clinics, a lot of psychiatric patients, and you have people on call. And when someone is having an emergency, maybe they're regularly scheduled, the regular staff that they work with is not available. Those persons are entitled to have vacations and breaks on the weekends and everything else. And so you would usually configure things like, I'm Dr. A and I have patients 1, 2, and 3, and I work with these 3 other people. And so the 4 of us should have access to patients 1, 2, and 3. But like the real world conflicts with that, right? Like actually there's like 100 people working at the clinic and there's a caseload of 3,000 patients, and any one of them could have an emergency. And when you're trying to deal with an emergency at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, you do not want to not have access to the records that you need in order to provide the best care you possibly can. And so then if you have, everybody has access to everybody's records, how do you detect when abuse is happening? So if I'm a person who started working at that clinic and it turns out that, someone I used to have a relationship with is a patient there and we're on bad terms and none of us are in great shape all the time anyway. So like maybe I'm making some bad decisions. I have access to their patient data. How do we detect if somebody working at the clinic is incorrectly accessing patient records? So we need audit trails. I'm a big fan of this. Like, don't prevent people from making wrong decisions. Give them lots and lots of power and let them know that someone will be looking at what they did with that power, right? And that's a powerful force for enabling people to improvise in the moment and rise to the occasion, and also provide some accountability. And so then, okay, so we start building this audit feature, and now who's going to review the audit logs? Nobody has the money to hire an extra person to go review audit logs. They're probably not going to do a very good job because they're going to get bored within 10 minutes, let alone the second week. And so what we did was flip things kind of upside down, and the person who sees the audit logs is the patient. Because what we really care about is actually that governance. Like, what are we trying to do with this technical change in the system? We're trying to influence the behavior of the people who have access to reduce the harm that's done, to remove temptation, or to provide fear of being detected, right? So you mentioned assuming that you're being watched all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We specifically made it so these people are like, oh, like as a staff member, any records you look at, like the patient sees who looked at their record. The patient sees that you looked at the record, because the other question is like, how does the patient, who is best placed to know like whether somebody looking at a record was appropriate or not? It's the patient. And so rather than like having this like all this control and that checks and double checks and who watches the watchers on the clinical side, it's like the patient will now see who's looked at their record. And there's no extra staffing costs. There's a more informed patient. There is a clear path like through human channels for that patient to like register a complaint. And you can just deal with it like you deal with everything else in the real world without like trying to change the way you staff and fund the organization to meet the way that like databases work.
Nice. So it's good system design.
Yeah, like all of it comes back to system, and humans are part of the system, not just
Mm-hmm.
the technology, right? Like humans are the most important part of the system.
For the average person, I know I have your list of washing your hands, of all the stuff that people in general should do for good protection. Are there any recommended resources that you recommend for learning more about privacy and security?
I think if people are interested in like specific current controls for today that might be out of date next year, the Electronic Freedom Foundation, EFF, has some great guidelines. So I think they actually have a journalist guide. And I know they have a bunch of very real world practical consideration to sort of walk people through like what's going to happen at a border crossing, what could happen at a border crossing. If X, Y, or Z happens at a border crossing, what are your options? And to really help you reason through all of those things. And then like for me, it makes me think like, do I really need to do that border crossing?
Are there any like consumer tools that are emerging? Like I know password managers and things like Signal are recommended for privacy and security. Do you think like consumer products like this help people protect themselves?
What I do for my family is it's not necessarily the only approach, but what I do for my family is I try and get them on Apple devices. Those text messages are encrypted. They have password management built in. They have remote erase capabilities, or like find my device capabilities. And so the simplest thing that I can do to help my family members is like give them a hand-me-down iPhone, rather than having them use some random outdated Android device and trying to get them to use a third-party password manager with questionable UX. That's the only approach that I've found that scales across the dozen family members.
Right. So it's just when you're consuming a product in general, just ask about security and try to compare that level as well.
Yeah, like it's that thing of that like at the business level, like what stuff can we shift over to a vendor, right? And so maybe we're paying $11 instead of $10 for something, but we're getting the second order benefits of like a team of 1,000 security engineers defending. It's the same thing with personal electronics, right? Like, I try really hard not to influence those people within my circle of influence to not get the cheap products, but to get the product that has a monthly fee and to get the expensive product with a good reputation, because the pressures are there, the inertia is there to provide the best probabilities that that product is going to be maintained and updated, rather than being like unmaintained for 10 years and being a glaring hole that someone walks along when they're randomly looking for things that they can break into.
Do you have any favorite products or services like that?
No, just like it's that thing of like, I really, really prefer ones that you pay for. Because if you play out what happens with like, oh, well, this one, there's no service fee. All right. Well, and this one was $50 cheaper. So what's it look like in 2 years?
Right.
Well,
Not
they're
actively
out of
maintained.
It's not actively maintained. And there's no way that, we have the technical ability to make sure that thing is patched and locked up. So like I'm thinking of like home security cameras, right? Like I absolutely want the ones where I'm paying a monthly fee for.
What would you recommend to someone who is interested in getting in your field, like security and DevOps, I guess?
It's a good question. I recommend to people that they don't get into the field. It's the volume of learning that you have to do and the rate of change is incredibly high. And so I think going into security is very much like going into medicine. You have to be pretty motivated. Like if you're just doing it because you think like it's a good way to make money, you're going to burn out really, really fast. Like there has to be something that is absolutely compulsively driving you towards this interest. And in that case, like if you're doing it because you can't not do it, getting experience building products and getting experience breaking into products is sort of the necessary groundwork to start thinking about how to defend. So if you haven't gone around trying to break in, I don't think you're very well placed, to like be an architect who's advising people on defending. The sort of generic advice I would have about like risk in general is to learn basic statistics, because those are actually like that probability math is incredibly useful for doing quantitative analysis of risk, and can be applied really, really effectively. So like if someone's not just interested in learning the latest the hacks of today, which are going to be totally outdated, next month, next software release. Learning to do quantitative analysis with probability is like very, very long-term beneficial. I think there's a new field which we will see emerge, and so as this gets a little hand wavy, but as we developed like police forces and psychology, we developed forensic psychology and started looking at things like why are people becoming serial killers, and like why are these like exceptionally bad things happening. And with the explosion in the use of artificial intelligence techniques, and the just exploding complexity of computer systems and the interrelatedness of things, you've got like computers deciding whether or not to issue loans, and you've got computers driving the cars, and you've got computers flying the planes. I think rapidly, within my lifetime, we'll be at the point where none of these systems like any person knows all of them. And so I think we will have the emergence of a discipline which is like computer criminal psychologist, like actually, and by that I mean like someone who is analyzing the behavior of computer programs that are doing things that are harming society. And we're trying to understand like why are these computer systems working together in this way and hurting society. I think we will have to figure out how to fight them, and how like why those things are happening. It won't be apparent. It won't necessarily be one company responsible. It'll just be like the interaction of this really large cognitive system is like hurting people. It's hurting society, and it's bigger than like, it's not an engineer debugging a fix. Like we have to really, really think about like why are these bad things happening, and what big measures can we put in place to stop them.
Exciting.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. When I'm giving people career advice, I really encourage them to separate out like the skills that a job might be hiring for now versus the types of problems they want to solve in general, and to build the lower level skills, the more broad skills that help them solve those kinds of problems, and then the specific stuff you have to relearn every year.
Right, ongoing.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me. This was great. I learned a bunch. Do you have any questions for me or anything you'd like to add?
Who's the audience for this? Who are you looking to help? You mentioned journalists and things like that.
Yeah, I think what I do is I work with creative individuals who run businesses online. So like people who specifically like YouTubers and young people who are running large internet businesses. And I think that the ability to run your own business is becoming easier and easier, but the harder things like business security are difficult to wrap your head around, and also a lot of times these people don't want to think about it. So I've taken it upon it like my responsibility to be the person that if someone's having trouble running their online enterprise, I'm a directory of resources.
Sure.
So my target audience is like ages 20 to 30, people who are running web-based businesses, often art or creative-based.
And do they have insurance, like business insurance?
These people are running off the seat of their pants. They don't have anything. What they have is a like Shopify and a YouTube.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think wherever you can buy insurance, it's like, it's an expense, of course, but it's a real thing. Like it is a very specific provision and capability that we've developed as a society that helps people take on calculated risk, and you're like deferring that risk across a larger group of people. So like when we were working in our online business with these fraud things, like we thought real hard, are we going to make it harder for people to sign up for accounts? We really don't want to do that. And what we opted for instead was to do more verification steps when someone does sign up for an account, like actually try and speak to someone on the phone at the business that signed up, like, hey, did you really want this? And we're paying an extra 0.4% on Stripe for the transaction fees in order to get chargeback protection, right? So I lump that into the category of insurance. What we get for that extra 0.4% is Stripe's entire anti-fraud department running their analysis over our transactions.
Right. So a team of people whose job it is to do all the heavy lifting for us.
Yeah. And so I'm not putting crazy captchas and barriers and friction in our sign-up process and in our sales process and all of that. Like, we're going to have a human talk to a human, and we're going to buy the insurance. Like, I think that's the level we should be at until we were 100 times bigger than we are today.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to hit stop record, and I appreciate, making the time to talk to me.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been great.
Great. I'm glad.